Hello and welcome to the Interrobang, the Wheeler Centre's Festival of Questions. My name is Helen Withicombe and I am the Programming Manager at the Wheeler Centre. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and their elders to any other communities who may be with us today. In this space, we've been having a lot of fun. We've been having a series of what we call snap lectures, short 15-minute pieces on the big questions in life. What is the difference between a muffin and a cupcake? Is the pursuit of beauty a classist act? And then we've got the biggest question of all. How will the world end? I knew that Upulie was the right person to answer that question when she turned up today wearing a dress that had dinosaurs all over it. Upulie is a molecular biologist, science communicator and writer. Over her research career, Upulie has worked in cancer research, developmental biology and is currently involved in nanotechnology research. She co-founded the highly successful science outreach program Real Scientists, and she communicates science through writing, performance and radio. Today, Upulie ponders the conundrum that while scientists have been able to tell us how the world began, how do they think it's going to end? She explores pre-human mass extinctions and why our thoughts often drift to the end of the world fears. Appropriately, for a festival of questions, we will be taking questions at the end of her talk, so please have them ready. But without further ado, let's welcome her to the stage.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Helen. So I've been given a really cheerful topic to talk about today. How does the world end? And this is actually one of the most fun kind of experimental questions that you can really try and answer. So how does the world end? You know, will it end through nuclear warfare? Will it be alien invasions? Will it be chemical war? Will an asteroid bump into the Earth and just destroy us or throw us off orbit or send us into the sun? Or will it end through global pandemic? And will the Martians or the lizard people finally reveal themselves to us and take over? So today I'll be talking about, say, the top 10 or 15 best apocalyptic scenarios, and we'll go through this as this sort of apocalyptic spotter's guide. But the first thing I've really got to ask is, which ending of the world are we talking about? Now, are we talking about the end of human civilization? Are we talking about the end of nations? Or are we talking about the end of the entire planet? Because the world has already, in many ways, ended several times. So the very first mass extinction to occur was at the very dawn of life on Earth itself. So life, we believe, began on this planet about 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. And the first organisms that arose on Earth didn't require oxygen. But oxygen was produced as a byproduct of their metabolism, right? The problem is that once you had all this oxygen in the atmosphere with these organisms that couldn't really cope with the oxygen, they hadn't evolved to deal with it, it actually killed off a lot of that initial life on Earth. So the Great Oxygenation event is the first extinction on this planet. And so all the organisms that made it through that say were capable of dealing with the oxygen or metabolizing it, are the ones that survived. So we sort of have oxygen to thank for the development of modern life on Earth, I guess, in a way. So that's kind of the first ending. And it's responsible for the evolution of most modern life forms. There was also a huge mass extinction at the end of the Permian. So that was what, I think it was 252 million years ago. And look, our understanding of the prehistoric world is completely based on the fossil record. It's based on our understanding of, say, ice ice tubes in the Antarctic and so on. So we have a really sort of a sketchy understanding and knowledge of the world that's past. And we're finding new fossils all the time. So we never have a complete record of the past of the history of this planet. But what we do know is that something like 80% of the species that evolved in the first 252 million years of life on Earth were wiped out at the end of the Permian, in the Permian extinction event. And we don't actually know why it happened. We still don't know why it happened. So that was, say, the second major ending of the world. And then there was a really big asteroid impact that killed some really special species called the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So that was another ending of the world. In any case, we needed that particular asteroid because we think that asteroid is the reason why humans kind of ended up on this planet. So we sort of have to thank the dinosaurs in a way for becoming extinct. So we're grateful for that random event of an asteroid destroying most of life on Earth, because our ancestors were tiny mammals in the times of the dinosaurs, and without their destruction, we wouldn't have evolved from them. That's not the end of the extinction rate on this planet, though. We're currently going through what many people call the Holocene Extinction. I think you must be familiar with it. We're losing species at a terrifying rate. We believe there's something in the region of 40 million species. I think we've only described a few 100,000 or something like that, so we'll never know what we've lost. And the irony is that as species become extinct, we don't know what the outcome is until they're gone. So we're running really behind all of that. So we've built an amazing planet after evolving and surviving the asteroid apocalypse. Humans have evolved on this planet. We've changed the planet to work for us. We've built civilizations, we've built towns and cities and advanced technologies. And yet we're still anxious about the end of the world. The end of the world, worrying about the apocalypse is not a new situation. We've been worrying about it since time immemorial, since we were first banding together in the wilderness. And probably the most early fear, even at that stage, was, I think, the 10th most popular apocalyptic scenario, which is Judgment Day. It's probably something not many of us believe in as much nowadays, but the idea that an omniscient and an omnipresent God would finally get sick of all of our crap and say, right, you've had your chance, we're done. I'm going to pick the good people, they're going to go to heaven, and the rest of you are going to go to hell. And people have been believing in Judgment Day since the time of Homer. So since the time of the ancient Greeks, since we were sentient and formed mythologies, we've been fearing that Judgment Day would arrive. It's also my least favourite one. So, number 9, will the planet end because of nuclear, biological or chemical war? We might have signed non-proliferation treaties and we might have signed all kinds of political agreements to restrict the development and use of biological and chemical weapons, but they're still out there. And with increasing political instability, with these little internecine wars that we have going, we don't know if we can still destroy ourselves through a nuclear apocalypse and the subsequent nuclear winter that follows. And that's really kind of the killer. It's sort of like, it's not just that the weapons will vaporize us and everything within a 50-kilometre radius, it's that the resulting nuclear winter will destroy all crops and result in all of us eventually probably resorting to cannibalism to survive until we all really, there's nothing left whatsoever. This is the most cheerful topic, isn't it? But nuclear war or chemical war is not the only possible source of a radiation event. The other way that we could die from radiation is, apart from, say, an electromagnetic burst from the sun that knocks out all satellites and electronic communication and everything electrical on the planet, which means that we probably will descend into chaos and war and eventually eat each other, which is always the ending scenario of any apocalyptic scenario, as we know. That's the other great fear. Not only do we fear that everything is going to end, probably what we really fear is like, am I really going to have to eat my neighbour? Right? So the sun might have a burst of radiation, and that could knock out, say, communications. Or even better, we might have a local star, maybe even the sun, but apart from the sun, that releases a giant burst of gamma radiation, which then burns off our atmosphere, which means that we're exposed to all of the elements and well, there are no elements in space, what am I saying? Exposed to all the radiation in space, and we die because we don't have an atmosphere. So there are many ways in which not having an atmosphere can kill us, as well as altering the atmosphere killing us. Which brings me to my next one, which is climate change. Is climate change going to destroy the world? Well, climate change may not necessarily directly, immediately cause the world to end, but it will, it currently is, it's not something that's going to happen in the future, affect the ecologies and ecosystems around us. It affects crop cycles, it affects the weather, it affects everything to do with agriculture. And the follow-on effects from this and potential ecological collapse in the way that all the microclimates and climates are changing around the world. I mean, we're aware of species of fish that normally subsist in, say, the warmer regions. So, say that we'll think of around New South Wales, they're migrating further south because the oceans are warming. So the subsequent effects of all of these tiny things that are affecting ecosystems around the world and therefore affecting agriculture can result in political instability, it can result in crop failure, it can result in famines. And all of that can lead to possible war. So climate change-induced wars or a war could be one way that the world ends. Speaking of ecological collapse, there are a number of ways in which we can generate ecological collapse, just in case you were planning some that didn't have anything to do with climate change. Overpopulation, overfarming, cutting down the rainforests, all of these things can contribute to ecological collapse. So it's not just climate change, but climate change in conjunction with various things like overpopulation can result in ecological collapse. We can also have pandemics affecting crops. So it's not just that pandemics can affect humans, which is the next topic, the happy topic I get to talk about, but they can affect crops, and because of the way that we transport crops, the way that we farm, where we have, we don't have a lot of variety in the kind of species and breeds that we use, these diseases can spread extremely rapidly and destroy crops, and then again we all die down the track. And climate change could also not just result from climate change can also result from climate change because of man-made induced climate change, because of nuclear war or chemical war, but we can also have a giant volcanic event where a bunch of volcanoes explode and we end up again altering the atmosphere and altering the weather on the planet, resulting in ecological collapse, crop destruction, war and death and famine. It's not getting better, is it? So ecological collapse is probably one of the most likely ways that we are going to die, and it will be a long, slow, painful death. Another way that we can die, another way to end the world, is through pandemics. So, as I said, we've built an incredible civilization and various advanced technologies. We can fly across the globe in 24 hours and so on, but this means that we can also carry diseases around with us at a rapid rate. And new diseases are always evolving, and we also have the issue of pandemic flu coming that will come up as well. So it's possible that we will have a disease like a pandemic flu or some other infectious disease that spreads like wildfire across populations and vulnerable populations, spreads so quickly around the planet before we can find a way of treating it. And this is in a situation where we are running out of antibiotics and we're running out of treatments. So that's one possibility of us, one way to die. So pandemics are one way to die, but these viruses don't have to be human. They can come from animals. And that's another problem. The spread and movement of animals due to climate change is another reason why we can have human-to-animal transfer of viruses. The other really amazing consequence of climate change is that the permafrost is melting. So the permafrost is this permanent ice sheet under the soil in most of the Arctic Circle. And it's melting because the temperatures are rising. And what we're finding is that there's a whole range of brand new viruses that have been frozen for something like 10 to 15,000 years that are now melting and, sort of coming into the ecosystem. We have no idea what to do with them. It's going to, that's like a whole bunch of research that we haven't done yet. And some of them are like these giant viruses that are bigger than any you've ever seen. So it's kind of exciting as a biologist. But so there are many, many ways that we can get a disease and die, in conclusion. So my next favourite apocalyptic scenario is that we have an asteroid or a comet or some kind of piece of space junk that either we have produced or that the universe has produced that is drawn into orbit around our sun and basically hits the Earth and destroys us. It either has the same effect as the asteroid did 65 million years ago and causes cataclysmic climate change. It causes tidal waves. It just destroys and flattens cities. Maybe if it's big enough, and I really doubt this is going to happen, and astrophysicists are welcome to sing out and say if I'm wrong, but if it's big enough, if it's going to happen, I'd really like it to be big enough to actually knock us off course off the orbit, and maybe we could even fall into the sun. So that would be like, if you're going to go if you're going to go because of interstellar stuff, you might as well go in a really interesting and exciting way. So asteroid and a comet. I think I talked about aliens before as well. So we could potentially, maybe if we're really, really lucky, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Look, these are things that you dream of as a scientist, right? You want to know that there are other intelligences in the universe. You want to meet these other civilizations. You want to travel through space. And there's always that long-running Calvin and Hobbes joke that the reason that we know that there's intelligent life in the universe is that they haven't bothered to make contact with us yet. But if there are alien civilizations, they'd be sufficiently sophisticated enough to take over this planet pretty easily. So that's a worry, but perhaps not the most immediate worry. But maybe there are, maybe the Martians will reveal themselves that they were here all along. There are, in fact, canals. They've just hidden them really well so that our robots on Mars can't actually see them. So the next possibility for us dying is everybody's all-time favourite. It's going to be in the top 5 of all apocalyptic scenarios, the zombie apocalypse. Who doesn't love a zombie apocalypse, right? I just love that the Centre for Disease Control actually has an entire document on how to survive the zombie apocalypse, which is actually a really fantastic way of dealing with pandemics. So if we don't have the zombie apocalypse, at least we know how to deal with a pandemic, right? Now, the zombie apocalypse is probably not as strange or as odd as you would think. How can we induce a zombie apocalypse? Now, people have been thinking about that. And I'm not thinking or talking about anyone in particular, but you might have seen a few movies where they suggest that using a virus could result in, say, people turning into zombies. So I think in was it I Am Legend, they use a virus to treat cancer, a modified virus to treat cancer, and it actually has the terrible side effect of turning you into a zombie, but it's believed to be a reversible process. Now, why are people so afraid of viruses? Because they are very, very difficult to treat. You can't treat them with antibiotics. And also, if you're going to modify a virus, it's highly likely that bits of it will insert randomly into your genome, which is probably one way you can turn into a zombie. But the best way that you could turn into a zombie, which is, I don't think it's currently under development, but it could be, and that is a fungus known as Cordyceps. And Cordyceps is one of my most favourite things in the entire world, because various parasitic wasps and insects actually inject their prey with this fungus, and they can actually control the the remaining carcass with it, right? So if you can sufficiently modify Cordyceps to affect humans in that way, and I'm not suggesting that anyone should do that, it's just a thought, but if you can modify it sufficiently and find a reasonable vector, you could very easily create a zombie apocalypse with controllable zombies, right? If you release, say that you put it into a virus, which is, again, something that will very easily infect people, you could contaminate, say, the beer supply in pubs. And that would be a very convenient, very quick and very slow, because you wouldn't get it immediately. That's the trick to the zombie apocalypse. You don't want everyone to find out immediately. It's just going to happen slowly when you're ready. Not that I've been thinking about it. So I think what we covered, we've talked about pandemics, we've talked about possible interstellar objects, I think there's another word for it, but I can't remember what it is, that will actually destroy, that will bump into the Earth or throw the Earth off orbit if we're really, really lucky. We've talked about pandemics. We've talked about, really, there are a lot of ways that you can see where we can create ecological collapse as a consequence of man-made actions, as a consequence of our neglect. So really, a lot of these scenarios are possible because of us, and consequently, and not to moralise too much, we can stop it from happening. So dealing with pandemics and dealing with nuclear war and dealing with ecological collapse is something that we can control. And it's really up to us to make a really dedicated effort to change the way that we do things, to change our societies, to change our policies and to change our politics. And we should definitely do it because this is such a unique planet. It's unlike any in the solar system, as we know. However beautiful Pluto might be, it's still got nothing on it. It's so cold it can't hold life. This is the only planet we definitely know has life on it, and we're destroying it at a terrifying rate. Maybe there is life on Enceladus and Europa, fingers crossed. But this is really the only place that we can call home. And we're not close in any way to leaving this planet and moving any of this to a space station or to another planet or to Mars. And I'll be talking about that at 4 o'clock today if you'd like to join us. So with all the terrifying possibilities and the terrifying ways that we can die, probably most of them, except for a gamma burst from a nearby star or an alien invasion, unless you're looking really closely at the lizard people, are preventable. And we should really, I just want to say, we should really make an effort to try and make it not happen, because it's worth doing something while you're here on this planet. And then, in 5 billion years, when all of this is over and maybe there are still humans left, or maybe there aren't humans left, and maybe the atmosphere has been burned off by a gamma burst, the sun will explode. It's currently a yellow dwarf star. It will eventually use up all of its fuel. It will explode into a red giant and in the process destroy Mercury, Venus and Earth, frying everything that remains on the surface of the planet. All life, all the oceans, they'll bubble up and disappear. The atmosphere will burn off and we will just be a dry hunk of rock left. So the world will end when we choose it to end, but it's also really just going to die anyway. So, yeah, thank you.
I feel terrible that we did that to you, and I feel like we've sucked your will to live. So thank you very much for taking us on that journey. I'm fascinated to know how much of that you had to research, or how much you know already just because you're a scientist and these are genuine fears that we should be worried about.
I guess it's kind of 70-30. I think most of us are really hyper aware of climate change and hyper aware of, the effect that it has on the ecology of the planet. And because every day we have a new publication that comes out that says X species has been detected in this area where previously it wasn't found. So species are spreading out and they're migrating to different environments, or they're becoming extinct. So I think the white rhino, is pretty much nearly gone. Again, that's a consequence of us rather than climate change. But we do have those statistics and studies coming in on an almost daily basis, and so we're just hyper aware of it as a result. The rest of it, like Judgment Day, is just like, oh, I know it exists. I know people believe in the rapture, so I should probably check that out just a bit.
Thanks for that uplifting tale, Phil.
Here to help.
As a nanotechnologist, can you talk to us a bit about the Gray Goo Scenario?
Oh, how could I forget the Gray Goo? Well, probably because I don't really believe in it. So the Gray Goo Scenario is this notion that we will create a nanomachine or a nano object that is self-replicating, that will take in all of the energy, and its output will just result in this constant replication and production, I think, of this nanomachine, and it will just destroy everything on the planet and then perhaps also, sort of end up in space. The problem with this idea is that to have something that's sort of self-perpetuating requires energy input. So as living things, we require energy input. We have to eat, and that food is converted into energy, and it rebuilds us. But for a non-sentient, non-living thing to do that, it requires energy, and we don't really have that much. And then the problem is that not only does it require input, the output is really low energy. It's like heat, sometimes it's light. So it doesn't mean that it will be a perfect conversion. So you'll never have that situation where it will continue on and on forever, which is why we don't have a perpetual motion machine yet. So probably not going to die of Gray Goo anytime soon.
We had another question down here. If we could get a mic down.
Some scientists say that we're not going to be able to match the lifespan of the Neanderthals, and that we're probably going to die by 3,000. What's your view on that? And if you agree with it, how do we not do that?
Oh, I'm not really aware of this. Sorry. This is that
I read it in *Sapiens*.
Oh, is this that the Neanderthals were around a lot longer than we were?
Yes. Yeah, and we're not going to be able to match their lifespan.
It would be wonderfully ironic if we didn't, because there's such a species-consistent loathing we seem to have as Homo sapiens sapiens. So I think for a while Neanderthals were classified as Homo sapiens neanderthalensis because they're so closely related to us. And every year we have to have a new study that proves that Europeans are not related to Neanderthals for some reason. So we have a really long race memory of hating Neanderthals, but they clearly were on the planet a lot longer than we were. And we've created probably a more sophisticated, advanced technological civilization, but that is also probably the source of our own destruction. So I guess it's that question again. It's like, what kind of civilization will result in long-term benefits to humans? So maybe we might not outlive them, but we might. We might actually still escape the bounds of Earth's gravity. So I think it's, again, it's up to us to do the right thing.
Did we have another question? Just over here.
We seem to love millennial cults now and then. Have we always had millennial cults?
There have always been groups throughout history who are absolutely convinced that the world will end at X time. There's an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to the set dates that people have predicted that the world will end. And so, so through, it's not just, we're focused on the millennium because, for our culture and society, for Western culture and society, that, that 2000 mark was significant. But for other, previously, I think, there were scientists in the mid to late 19th century who were still trying to study, say, basic processes like heat and light formation and so on. And so they tried to predict the age of the Earth. So what they did was I think Newton did this as well, they added up the ages of everybody in the Bible, and then they said, okay, so this is how old the Earth is, and therefore this is when it will end as a consequence. So we've created dates for the ending of the world dependent on our religious beliefs, on our cultural beliefs and myths all the time throughout history.
Are you a fan of end of the world movies and books and, you know, that sort of cultural obsession with it?
I am a little bit of a fan of the end of the world movies. I found I Am Legend really interesting, but also terrifying, and also scientifically inaccurate because I'm a molecular biologist. It's like, no, the virus isn't going to do that. Like, it won't get through clinical trials like that. Not at all. But it's always a really interesting scenario because we always, I think we assume that we're not great and we behave in that way. We don't behave in the sense that we expect the best of people. And I think that this obsession around apocalypse scenarios also goes to how are we going to behave in this situation of chaos without order. And we want to know and hear those narratives because we want to know that some way, I think, even after such a terrible calamity, we might redeem ourselves somehow.
Oh, I've got time for one last question over here.
Hello.
What do you think about generation ships, or the idea that, I mean, maybe we can't colonize Mars, but what if we can just go into a spaceship and send some fraction of the population off to survive?
I'm a big fan of this thesis. I do think it's a possibility. So whether we can get to interstellar travel is a really big question, and it's dependent on many things, not just technological advancement. It's just like, it's not just that we can create the spaceships, it's whether we can survive in space. It's whether we can have enough food and all of those things to survive in space. So we have to try and basically take a mini planet with us on a spaceship. And I think what we might have to do is say, we'll have to really take the International Space Station really seriously and build a few more, and maybe go through several generations of people who are born on and evolve on in space, so that they're adapted to different conditions and they're adapted to zero gravity and things like that. So I think, yeah, we'd probably have to have this progress of leaving Earth. So 1, we're orbiting; 2, we're on the Moon; 3, we're halfway to Mars; 4, we're on Mars, and so on and so forth.
Well, thank you for staying so cheerful in the face of such doom. Please join me in thanking Upulie.